on the one hand, and sense of reality on the other hand, was always apparent in your presentations and was well appreciated. On the right-hand side, the balloon is an indication of that. Because I remember at least 2 times that you showed this in your presentations, and posed the intriguing question: is the balloon filled with hydrogen, one of the central molecules in your career, or with hot air? That brings me to the topic of today. Well, not the balloon in particular, but more in general. I think that Dr. Rostrup Nielsen has studied extensively catalyst stability, realizing that it's nice to understand activity and selectivity, but also we would like to couple the structure of the catalyst to its stability. And the 2 elements of choice today, copper and nickel, I would say central elements in the company Haldor Topsoe that Dr. Rostrup Nielsen has worked with for such a long period of time. So those will be the elements that I will discuss. It will be related to synthesis gas conversion, as our chairman already indicated, and we will try to consider the aspects of the catalyst that have impact on catalyst stability, in particular related to particle growth or the inhibition thereof. Copper for methanol synthesis and nickel for methanation. So synthesis gas conversion, CO and hydrogen can be made from any carbon-containing source by appropriate technology. Then depending on the metal, with copper we produce methanol, with nickel, methane. The other elements I will not discuss today, but copper and nickel will be the elements. So supported catalysts in many ways. Many examples, many situations. So indicated in red here, metal nanoparticles, say with the size of 1 to 10 nanometers. On support, dispersed on the support, particle size 50 nanometers or larger. And these structural features that are related to stability are a number, but in particular, today we will discuss the nanoparticle size, nanoparticle distribution, the support properties like the pore diameter and so on, and also the surface properties. Just to dwell briefly on the metal particle distribution, I'm not referring here to the size distribution, but rather the spatial distribution. So if we have a support material with these images indicated in gray, the silica support in this specific case, and the black dots, the nanoparticles of a given size, distributed in very different ways in this schematical overview. So a uniform distribution of nanoparticles, in fact maximizing this interparticle space, or the distance between the nanoparticles. This is the minimum distance, you might say, the particles are clustered, and this is what we often also are confronted with in industrial catalysts, that is high density domains of nanoparticles in certain areas of the support, while other areas of the support are empty. And the question is to what extent these structural features play a role in stability, and of course we expect that if nanoparticles growth is our dominating the activation mechanism, that catalyst stability will be affected by this structural feature. Because particle growth is apparent in many syngas processes, and either migration and coalescence or osmotic ripening may be apparent. Migration and coalescence, in fact, relying on the mobility or the diffusion, if you like, of nanoparticles on the support at above certain temperature and conditions, and that migration may lead to coalescence, ending up with a larger particle and thereby a lower specific surface area for the metal. In osmotic ripening, the particles are not mobile, or at least assumed to be, but rather the communication or transport between particles is via either the gas phase or surface diffusion of small species, being it molecular or even atomic, and that implies that with a higher concentration for the monomers, with the small particles. There's a net flux from small particles to large particles, and again we end up with larger particles at the end. This has been studied over decades by many researchers, and so names are indicated. Now let's have a look for copper, for methanol synthesis, and we will discuss three aspects: distribution of the copper nanoparticles, effective support porosity, and support composition, if you like, affected by support functionalization. This study has been headed by Professor Petra de Jong, working with Gonzalo Prieto, Giovanna Zesevic, and Roy van der Ven. Methanol synthesis, a very important process, with a world production of methanol over 50 million tons per annum, with a typical catalyst composition: copper, zinc oxide, alumina. Temperature range is indicated, pressure range is indicated, and the catalyst deactivation is significant and largely caused by copper particle growth. And what we did is moved away from the commercial catalyst to a model catalyst, if you like, with a silica-based ordered mesopores material, so-called SBA15, with mesopores with a diameter of 8 nanometers in this case, and these are the other textural properties. We emplace copper and zinc oxide on those supports, and we do that by an incipient wetness impregnatation method with concentrated copper and zinc nitrate solutions, aqueous solutions with the copper-zinc ratio indicated here. We dry carefully at room temperature in vacuum, and that copper nitrate hydrate that is dispersed over the silica is now decomposed in two different ways. The temperature is indicated here. Either we use a nitrogen flow, which gives us a uniform distribution of copper nanoparticles, or we use a gas flow containing 2 volume percent of nitric oxide in nitrogen, and then we get high density domains of copper nanoparticles of similar sizes but very different interparticle spacing, as I will show in the next slide. Subsequently, we move to catalysis with typical conditions for copper and for methanol synthesis. Of course, important is CO2. That brings about some steam in the syngas and has also an important effect on catalyst stability. So first of all, we move to the distributions. So the fundamental feature that we published a couple of years ago is that after drying, the copper nitrate hydrate is non-uniformly distributed on the support. So in yellow the support, in red the copper nitrate schematically, and we get patches of copper nitrate and empty parts on our support. Typical for metal nitrates with limited interaction with silica. If we do the calcination in a mixture of nitric oxide and nitrogen, we get nanoparticles of this typical size, and more or less we find patches of nanoparticles, high density domains, which more or less is the footprint of the copper nitrate. And we have empty spaces on our support. Calcination in air or nitrogen gives us redispersion of the copper nitrate and nitrite, and gives us a very uniform distribution of the copper with similar sizes, not identical but similar. Now the chemistry behind it is in this paper. It's a bit too much detail to go in depth, but we use this methodology to just change the thermal treatment, so at identical loading and identical precursors we can change now the interparticle spacing. And that's what we did. So in this electron tomography study that we published in 2013, the nitrogen calcination shows in this SBA15, so we have pores running in this direction, that these copper particles of about 6 nanometers or so are rather uniformly distributed throughout the porous body of the SBA15. Whereas with the NO calcination, there's certain pores which are heavily filled and other pores are empty. So we have a very non-uniform distribution and high density domains in these mesopores. Now if we can quantify all this data, so we get a particle size distribution, For the NO calcination, the particles are a bit larger, but more importantly, the particle-particle distances, first and second nearest neighbors, are very much larger for the N2 calcination than with the NO calcination. So clearly, these small interparticle spacings with the NO calcination and much larger spacing with nitrogen. And that has a direct bearing on the stability. So for the nitrogen calcination, we get a very stable performance under these conditions, while the NO calcination catalyst gives us a much more rapid deactivation. The proposal that we put forward in this paper that particle-particle migration and coalescence may be important in the case of the small interparticle spacing, while the large interparticle spacings that are apparent in this sample may lead to that Ostwald ripening takes over. That was where the paper ended, and of course we were a bit speculative at that moment in time. So we continued along along a couple of lines this study. The first one, to use silica gel materials, where we had a variation of the support pore diameter, and we used two sets of catalysts. One was the nitrogen calcination material, so uniform distributions, and one with NO calcination with small interparticle spacing, so high density domains. And what we found for the so we analyzed the deactivation data. This is the second order deactivation constant on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis is the support diameter. And surprisingly, when the interparticle spacings are large, the system doesn't respond to the pore diameter. Whereas in the case of particles being close together, the pore diameter is very important, depending on the specifics of the loading and so on. But the pore diameter is a very important one, supporting the view that particle migration, which of course means that the pore network and the pore architecture is important for particles that they can reach each other, is important in this case, while here, most likely the particles communicate via Ostwald ripening, and the pore diameter is not important. We extended that work, and we published that last year, where we moved, on the one hand, from silica gel also to SBA type systems of the SBA 16 types, which is not the one-dimensional that I showed before, but rather the cage-like structures, and jumping to the conclusion for the deactivation rate constant on the vertical axis is proportional again to the pore or entrance size of the cages in case of the NO calcine samples, so the particles are close together, and then we get a very nice relationship between the activation and pore diameter. So this is all nice for particle migration and coalescence, but the fact remains that if the distances are large, there is still communication between particles, and that's Ostwald ripening. So what can we do to suppress that route for particle growth? And we started a study to functionalize the support and keep the particle size distribution and the particle-particle distance constant. That's quite a challenge, I should say, but we were able to do so. We started from Stoeber silica spheres, and we modified the Stoeber silica spheres by aminopropyl triepoxysilane, and in that way we got functionalization of our support with amino groups rather than the OH groups on the silica, and by a careful operation we can keep the texture and the further pore diameter, pore volume, etc. very close. The challenge is now to have on both supports similar particle sizes and particle-particle distances. And that we did as follows. So the silica, unfunctionalized, we impregnated with copper nitrate, and we used nitrogen calcination to get our redistribution and maximum spacing between the copper particles, and this is the typical size distribution that we obtained. And we have our functionalized silica, and here we use the NO calcination, for a reason that I can't elaborate upon here, but at the end we get very close particle size distribution, and again, a very uniform distribution. Of course, now, because of the presence of the amino groups. So similar copper oxide particle sizes and distributions on both supports. And that gives us the activity versus time for the functionalized materials in red, very stable performance, whereas with the unfunctionalized silicon we have more extensive particle growth, which is also apparent from our fresh catalyst on the left-hand side, and after 240 hours methanol synthesis on the right-hand side, very modest growth for the functionalized support, whereas quite extensive growth for the unfunctionalized support. Interestingly, the catalyst activity initially and the turnover frequency are very close, so our functionalization doesn't have an impact on the copper particles here, but the deactivation, the second order deactivation rate constant changes by a factor of almost 3. So we think that by support functionalization and support properties in general, we can slow down Ostwald ripening. The second example that I would like to show is nickel for methanation. And again, in fact, we felt that interparticle spacing would be crucial, so we started to vary the interparticle spacing, and also we varied the initial particle size. Again, we used, this is work from Peter Munnik, and we cooperated with Dr. Sidney Gomez from the University of Liège in Belgium on this, and we published part of these results last year in this paper. We used again our knowledge that we developed over the years on metal nitrate chemistry to control size and distribution. That is not trivial, so here are some of the references. It is again the nickel nitrate with limited interaction with the silica tends to aggregate in certain areas of your support, but if you use freeze drying, so you solidify the metal nitrate during the sublimation of water, then we get very uniform distribution. So here we use conventional drying to get clustered or high density domains, and freeze drying to get uniform distributions. Again, we use the thermal treatment, but now use the nitrogen to get somewhat larger particles and the NO to get somewhat smaller particles. Again, this is not trivial with respect to what I said about copper, but in these references all the details are there, and I think we understand that quite well. Then we used electron microscopy of microtobed thin sections, and we assessed the stability for the methanation reaction. And there's a variety of papers over the years, including those of Dr. Rossip Ilsen, that show that at low temperature methanation conditions, Ostwald ripening is the dominating mechanism for particle growth. And we use that information to come up with a quantitative model to describe the catalyst deactivation. So straight away to the catalyst after reduction at 500 degrees C, but before catalysis. And these codes read as follows. Nickel, the D is the distributed or uniform distribution, and C stands for clustered. So here we have nickel particles of around 8 nanometers or so in size. Here we have 9 nanometers, so the number here indicates the size in nanometers. 9 nanometer particles, but clustered together. And for the 4 and 3 nanometer particles, so quite substantially larger, we always have high density domains, so we indicated nickel C4 and nickel C3. And those 4 systems we're going to study in the methanation reaction. Here the interparticle spacings, which vary of course, so they're much larger for the uniform sample than for the clustered one. But here is the methanation, the activity on the on the vertical axis versus the time on stream. And what we see is that the C3, C4 samples, here in blue and in red, the triangles and the circles, those are very active, while the larger particles, the 8 and the 9, start off at quite somewhat lower activity, according more or less at the same turnover frequency with the quantify the data. However, these very active catalysts initially, they deactivate extremely fast, and both these lines, after a few hours on stream already, drop below the ones with the catalyst with the larger nickel particles. So the larger nickel particles, initially less active, after a couple of hours are more active because they are much more stable. And also what was apparent that whether we have large spaces between the nickel particles or small spaces, so uniform distribution or clustered, that both gives a very similar deactivation. So the particle-particle distance does not seem to matter. So the proximity of nickel particles has no impact on stability, but the smallest particles have the highest initial activity, but the largest particle the highest final activity, you might say. The spent catalysts immediately show what happens. So with the D8 and C9 we see a bit growth of the particles, but not very much, while initially, and the scale bar is 50 nanometers, initially we have 4 nanometer and 3 nanometer particles. Here we have huge chunks of nickel, which by the way is not outside the pore network. This is very important. We do ultramicrotowing, so this is not nickel on the outside of the grain, as many people have suggested. It is nickel inside the porous network. That's very important for the remaining of the story. So keep that in mind. This is ultramicrodome sections. So these huge chunks of nickel, they generate the space inside a pore network that's quite uniform initially. We said that Oswald wiping is our working hypothesis based on many important publications in the past. So the nickel carbonyl is formed with a small particle and net flux to the large particle, and you have particle growth. This is some key assumptions for the modeling. So the nickel carbonyl pressure is a function of the radius r of the particle according to the Kelvin equation. The diffusion of nickel carbonyl is not the rate limiting step. And there's a lot of evidence from that if you do the quantitative modeling, but that is impossible, because then the system would deactivate within seconds rather than within hours. So the rate determining step of particle growth is the decomposition of the nickel carbonyl. That's the assumption we made. And we modeled an ensemble of particles based on the Kelvin equation for generating the carbonyl and the kinetic equations to decompose the metal negative. We have two types of growth, one where the particle diameter is smaller than the pore diameter, and one for confined growth when the particle is larger than the pore radius. Sorry, the pore radius is smaller than the pore radius. The particle. I arrived last night at 12 o'clock in the hotel, you understand, right?
We are
still a bit dizzy, but it's about particle radius and pore radius. So off we go. These are the key equations. This is the Kelvin equation, well known. So the nickel carbonyl pressure goes exponentially with 1 over r, r being the radius of the particle. Then there's two types of growth. One is unhindered growth. So we just say we have an ensemble of particles and they can grow whatever their size is. And the rate of growth for a given particle radius has to do with a growth parameter that we quantified from kinetics and everything, something in nanometers per second or so. This is the supersaturation that is set by the carbonyl pressure of the ensemble of particles over the particle radius that we consider for growth. And this is again this Kelvin factor. This is rather straightforward, the Kelvin equation with this kinetical limitation. And then there is confined growth. That is to say, we assume that this exponent is hitting a barrier. This capital lambda has to do with the elastic properties of the support. So if you hit the wall, then there's a new pressure, similar to the surface tension, you might say. There's a pressure on the particle to become stabilized. So that we involved mathematically in this term. And there we go, these are the results. So again, the activity is a function of time. These are the experimental data. And we have two sets of modeling efforts. And that's indicated here. The unhindered particle growth is in blue. So what we see is that when we started to model for the small particles, that by far the best realistic fits can only be obtained if we assume that the particle can go unhindered, there's no confinement, as if the pores don't exist in the support. Whereas the large particles, and although we have quite a spread, depending on the assumption on turnover frequency, there's a slight structure sensitivity in this reaction. It's complicated now, but don't forget about it. But basically, we can only in confined growth we get the model, which is the dotted line and the full line. We can the right order of magnitude for the deactivation, and the unhindered growth gives unrealistic low activity predictions. So the graphical summary is as follows. So if we have particles of a bit different size, because they're never exactly equal, although we have rather narrow particle distribution, always differences. And that implies if we are in a pore network, that if we have very small particles, the supersaturation is such that the pores on the system, they can break the pores and generate new pores, and you get very large particles compared to the original pore diameter. If you start off larger, they grow in confinement because the supersaturation is lower and the forces on the wall are such that they are, and the strength of the support is such that they can confine the growth. Here you find all the details and also the mathematical modeling that I discussed or briefly introduced on the previous slide. So with that, copper catalyst for methanol synthesis from our model catalyst. I think that's important to say that if particles are close together, we think that particle migration dominates, and that particle-particle distances matter, and also the support porosity is important. If particles are remote from each other, we know being more than two times its own diameter, osmolar ripening dominates, a narrow particle size distribution is favorable, but also support functionalization may slow down particle growth. Nickel catalyst for methanation. In fact, for stable catalyst performance, it's better to start with larger particles that grow in confinement rather than the small ones which break up the support system. Of course, support from many parties. For the copper work, very important. The DOE-funded EFRC, headed by Jerry Spivey, and for the copper work, I also would like to highlight here the support from Haldor Topsoe, in particular the work on support functionalization, and the people who we work with, including Jens Segerstedt and Stig Helvig from Haldor Topsoe, and others are mentioned in this slide. And welcome to Utrecht University, and thank you for your attention.